Something you didn't know about me. I spent 4 summers in college as an Iowa girl in Louisiana, just across the causeway from New Orleans in the Mandeville, Covington area. I worked at a health club, helped my sister-in-law with my young niece and nephew while my brother was a deep sea diver who was often gone for weeks and even months. So I guess I was a glorified family nanny. And it was a blast. It was probably the first time I was really outside of my own home state. I ate my fair share of crawfish and Cajun food and love gumbo and jambalaya. But I have to admit, I don't indulge very often anymore until maybe now. If I said we're talking clean eating and Southern cuisine today, does it seem like these two phrases should not be together? Think again. I'm Deborah Atkinson. You're listening to Flipping 50, where I address your top struggles and concerns, and I share what to eat, how to move, and sometimes how to change your mindset about what to eat and how to move so that you can have the energy and the vitality that you want, need, and deserve in this second and better half. And I cannot wait for this episode today. My guest is Amanda Gipson Nowosadzki. Trust me, practice that several times. She is the author of the Clean Southern Cuisine cookbook and founder of the Clean Southern Cuisine blog. She delights in helping others to improve their health through scrumptious Southern recipes that are healthier and free of gluten. Amanda hails from Cajun Country in South Louisiana. Much of her childhood was spent learning to cook traditional family recipes. That, coupled with later working in the catering industry in New Orleans, ignited her love affair with food, especially Southern cuisine. When work took her out of the South, she continued and constantly craved the flavors and food from home. Later, it became necessary for her to make dietary changes to combat ongoing health issues. So she combined her love for Cajun, Creole, and Southern food with her desire for more nutrient-dense and gluten-free fare. Clean Southern Cuisine was born. Congratulations on the book, Amanda, and thanks so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I can't wait. And I think we're going to have to give potentially some of our listeners anyway, a vocabulary lesson on what is Cajun and what is Creole. And yet I also want to say that I think probably every listener might be thinking, when we think Southern cuisine, we really think like indulgent and I'm going to have a hard time pushing away from the table and really overeating. And you've kind of taken that and turned it upside down. So talk to me about your health issues and what actually inspired that.
Absolutely. So, it was, let's just say I began this journey to clean eating for a different reason than I stayed the course. And you are absolutely right that typically Southern food and unhealthy is synonymous. And it's something that us Southerners really kind of wear a badge of honor about, I guess. And Deborah, you probably know that because as I've just learned, you spent some time in Southern Louisiana, which I think is fabulous. Didn't know that about you before.
I don't think I ever had a po' boy though. I don't think I did.
Oh, well, you know what? I'm actually working on a po' boy recipe for my blog this summer. So that's forthcoming. But at any rate, what led me to clean eating was that I had a landmark birthday around the corner. And as we do, is oftentimes as women, I feel like almost unfortunately, we might have a landmark birthday coming up and we go, okay, I want to lose a few pounds. And that was the case with me. So approaching that landmark birthday, I decided I'm going to try this paleo diet I've been hearing about because I want to lose weight. Well, Deborah, I did that. But what I never could have anticipated is that about a month in, I want to say, the chronic tendonitis in my wrist that I'd been dealing with and the IBS or inflammatory bowel syndrome that I'd actually dealt with for years, both dissipated. And I just kind of had this light bulb moment where I went, oh my gosh, I can't believe these things were gone. And it was so simple because previously I'd been to doctors for both of them. I mean, the tendonitis in my wrist was really painful to the point that I was taking days off of my corporate job because I couldn't type, forget working out, right? And it was just, it was quite a journey. And when I went to see doctors, I just didn't feel like a pill or a cream was like the right long-term solution for me. I didn't want to have to do that indefinitely. So a month into my first foray into clean eating, we'll say, is when I really had that light bulb moment. Like, holy cow, the food I've been putting into my body really on a systemic level caused a ton of inflammation. That was the first time I took it beyond, okay, my stomach might hurt if I eat something that doesn't agree with me or if I eat something unhealthy. That was really the first time that I made that solid connection between the food that we eat and the inflammation it causes in our body. So it really it led me to start creating and revamping a lot of family recipes like gumbo that you mentioned, which traditionally is not something we'd consider healthy or nutritionally dense.
I love hearing this. And I think there's probably a lot of people in our audience who can identify with IBS. Right? And if it's not that you're calling it IBS, listeners, there are a lot of you that I know that you and I may not have had this conversation, but a high percentage of our members and our listenership really have problems with constipation, but don't tell anybody. It's not really a happy topic you bring up in conversation with a girlfriend. It's not really something you want to sit down and talk to your man about or your partner. And we don't have those conversations really with our doctor in the short time we get with many of our doctors. So I can identify, and I think a lot of women also are at that point where their guts don't respond to foods that they've always loved in the same way that they always did. And they are able to recognize exactly what you're discussing, that these issues are there. And I have to throw this in. This is just out of the blue. But Amanda, you don't have an accent.
No, I don't. Sometimes I kind of feel like I got left out on that. Yeah, I don't have the typical accent for growing up in Cajun country at all. And often,
I'm going to suggest, I think for marketing purposes for this book, you should pick one up.
I'll have to work on that.
It just dawned on me while you were talking, so I couldn't resist throwing that in. Okay, so you mentioned the reason for starting to eat this way and then the reason for staying. So now we've got that whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
And how far down the road is this? So has it been years since you identified this new way of eating?
It has been. It's been about 10 years for me. And, I've never turned back. There were moments where I decided, okay, I'm going to, whatever, I'm going to indulge in like a traditional po' boy and I'm going to have the gluten and the French bread and all of that stuff. And, I've been sorely disappointed when I've done that because my body just does not respond well to those inflammatory ingredients anymore. And as you said, I think it's the case probably for a lot of your listeners that unfortunately, we reach that moment where either like me, you try a new diet or a clean eating protocol, and you have that moment where you realize maybe you stray back to something from your previous life, if you will, and then you sorely regret it because it no longer serves your body.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I can so identify with that. There have been those moments, and then I remember moving into this house a couple of years ago, almost to the day, a couple of years ago. And my brother-in-law and we got here early. The movers weren't here. And he's like, well, we could sit by the pool and have a beer, or we could unload. What do you want to do? And I said, I don't really drink, and you know that. So we're going to unload. And we got done. And he was like, let's go get something to eat, and I ate something I never do, and the next day I paid for it. Like immediately.
It's the worst.
Yep.
It's the worst, but I think it's also simultaneously a blessing because I do think it's our bodies letting us know, like, hey, I don't want that anymore. This no longer serves us and we need to evolve. So
So true. Okay. So I have to say, you've got two opposite ends of the continuum potentially, um, audiences whom this book might appeal to. And I would say that the clean eaters are probably far more open to, oh, finally, there's a book for, these kinds of flavors and this kind of ethnicity and food, and I've missed that. So great, they're celebrating. But I have to wonder if there aren't some true Southerners looking down their nose at the idea that this could be good. Have you run up against that?
I have, and Deborah, you so hit the nail on the head. I've been guilty of the same thing. I remember pre-clean eating journey for me, I absolutely felt the same way. I think it's almost a curse growing up in a place like this where the food is literally so sublime that you're proud of it. And it's almost to the point that we discuss Southern food and it not being healthy with a little bit of a chuckle. And it's, as I said earlier, it's sort of like we wear that like a badge of honor that it's not healthy, but it's delicious. And Southern food and unhealthy just don't have to be synonymous anymore. And when I set out to write this cookbook, I had a lot of people go like, you're going to what? Like that's just not possible, right? But for me, one of the moments where I felt just really confirmed and like I was on the right track with doing this is I often spend time back in my parents' place in Louisiana. I'm back here as much as I can be because it's home and I love it. But I remember testing quite a few recipes for my cookbook one day. I believe one of them was the coconut shrimp recipe. I'd made some gluten-free gumbo as well. And I decided for fun, I'd tried a lot of these recipes out on friends and family, but I decided for fun to bring some over to one of my mom and dad's neighbors, who I'll say is just, very much a Cajun, very proud of the food that's here. And that's what he enjoys all the time. And I remember just having this moment where I knew I was on the right track because when he tasted the gumbo and the shrimp, he just thought it was excellent. And then after the fact, when I told him, I made this gluten-free and it's actually all pretty healthy for you, he was just blown away and couldn't believe it.
Perfect test. The perfect test. I love that. Okay. So before we dive into the paleo and keto and talking about, autoimmune diets, I want to define for our listeners. So talk about Cajun and Creole, and let's just give them a little vocabulary lesson here.
Sure. So, most people have visited New Orleans, being that it is such a tourist attraction. And it's sort of funny. Typically and historically, New Orleans has been more of a Creole destination. Black or mixed race. Cajuns tend to be more rural parts of the South, like New Iberia, the city that I'm from. And the cuisines that go along with those cultures really, really were separate for quite some time. So a lot of folks have been to New Orleans, as I mentioned, because it is such a tourist attraction. The thing about that is New Orleans really started taking on Cajun food. I believe there was actually a very specific moment in time. I'm not going to remember the year at the moment, but there was a food fair that had quite a lot of writers coming to it. It's been a couple decades now. I believe it was in the 80s. And at that food fair, there was some Cajun cuisine that was showcased as well as a lot of Creole cuisine. So there are similarities, but there are some differences and some differences that people get pretty serious about when it comes to gumbo ingredients like okra or tomatoes or not and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But at that food fair, I think that's where there was a really there was a submerging, if you will, of the two cuisines. in the eyes of the writers that attended and the eyes of the press that attended. And I think New Orleans sort of took on some of the Cajun food and Cajun culture because that's what people associated it with a little bit after that initial food fair. And then I think from there, it also became that people started to think they were the same thing, which they're not in terms of cuisine. There are a lot of similarities, as I mentioned, but it's highly debated. And if you Google it, you'll find 10 different things. It's an ongoing, I guess, misconception that they're exactly the same thing. But what I would like to say is in terms of Cajun and Creole cuisine, it all gets along very well. And if you do go to New Orleans, then you can experience both of those for yourself in one place.
Fantastic. And they're all so good. It is a fantastic place to visit. So let's come back to the fact that really you haven't gone 100% paleo, keto, or autoimmune friendly diet. But what you are is honoring Southern cuisine. Like you said, I mean, there's gumbo in here. There's biscuits in here. I mean, it's really very traditional. So why did you choose, or did you choose not to, honor paleo specifically or keto?
You've got it. Yeah. So it was definitely intentional. And I wanted to create an approachable and a sustainable means to eating healthier Southern fare, right? And I knew that if I dove all in and went for like fully paleo or fully keto, then I would lose people. And I really wanted to reach the widest breadth of people that I could. Even some Southern folks who have what I call a healthy dose of skepticism. I also knew that I wanted to strike a balance between that nutrient density and then still maintaining that authentic Southern recipe with traditional taste and textures that I grew up with. Sometimes paleo or keto, AIP, some of them, sometimes they don't, sometimes only, I'll say, they don't lend themselves to striking exactly the balance that I wanted because I'm a little bit of a perfectionist when it comes to that, meaning I want you to be able to feed any of the items from my cookbook to your friends and family and them to never even guess that it's gluten-free or nutritious for you. That was the goal that I set out with. So that was really why I didn't marry myself to one particular style. It's more of you're never going to find gluten in the book because that's a huge inflammatory agent for many of us. Some of us don't even realize it. But you may occasionally have the option to enjoy some grass-fed dairy or cheese if that works for you. Or there are going to be modifications to make a particular recipe, paleo or keto, etc., if you have those needs in your life.
Love that. I really love it. And actually love the photography. The pictures are so very nice. Do you have a favorite in here, a favorite couple recipes?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough one. Okay, well, Deborah, we're going to mention gumbo again because gumbo is just so much like the state of Louisiana, being a cultural melting pot, and that's exactly what gumbo is. It's a dish that was, really sewn together by many different cultures, and it's also a dish that I guess if I ever had to pick a last meal, gumbo would be involved because it's just that much of a comfort food for me. And I think for so many in this area. And it's just one of those things when you come home as a child and you smell a parent or a relative, you smell that distinct smell of roux because they're cooking it on the stovetop. You just know something good is going to follow. And I think gumbo was the reason that I wrote this book in the first place, because it was the first recipe that when I was dedicated to a strict paleo diet, I thought to myself, what am I going to do if I can't ever eat gumbo again? So it was really that dish that led me to really start reinventing family recipes, regional recipes, and creating new ones. So I'd say gumbo is one, and then us Southerners love to have a good pound cake. So There's definitely a pound cake recipe in the book that employs almond flour to get you some great protein and healthy fat in there. And I'd say that that's probably a favorite too. There's just so many I love. It's hard to pick.
Well, I have to tell you, you have a crawfish pie in here. So I'm curious. So somebody say, and I'm from the Midwest, I don't know, but I don't know here in Scottsdale, can I go to the store and buy crawfish?
It's becoming more prevalent in other states. Even in Colorado, I've started to notice it places, and I think Louisiana is doing a Louisiana Seafood Board and is doing a good job trying to get it to other places. But if not, there are a couple of online services where you can order locally caught crawfish. And I believe one of them is CajunGrocer.com, where you can get it delivered to you, and it would be crawfish tails, which would be perfect for the particular crawfish pie that you're mentioning, which, oh my gosh, Deborah, when you said that, I realized I think that would have to be a part of my last meal as well. I don't think I could give that up.
It looks really good. And I have to say, one of my favorite things down there was, I mean, regularly every week, but definitely every summer I was there, regular crawfish boils with the potatoes and the corn and the crawfish just in bags and then dumped onto picnic tables where you just sat there and what do the t-shirts say? Suck the head, bite the tail.
That's right.
Yep.
That's absolutely right.
I love it. Okay, so what else is happening? What's next?
What's next? Well,
yeah.
I'm looking forward to putting forth a lot more recipes on my blog and really just, really just getting this cookbook out to more people because, as you said, some Southerners could definitely be looking down their noses at it. And I would say to anybody listening who's thinking that, set aside your skepticism for just a little bit and give it a chance. That's what I did. And once I started to create these recipes for myself, I was just delighted that I could have it. I could have both. I could have the phenomenal food that some of us have been lucky enough to grow up with, but I could also have it more nutritionally dense, and I could make it in such a way that it wasn't going to cause an inflammation explosion in my body. So I would definitely say that to them. But what's next is really going to be just to get more recipes out to folks, and really just to get this cookbook out into the world.
I love it. And so I'm going to ask this on behalf of our listeners and based on what I remember. So I remember coming home inspired from one summer. My parents' anniversary was on August 11th. And I remember cooking like a 5 or 6 course meal, and every course was something Cajun. So, I mean, we had gumbo, we had jambalaya, we had numerous things. But I remember I was in the kitchen like all day. And I don't know if that was just me and inexperience, but it seemed labor intensive. So for my listeners, talk to me in the process of making healthy Southern food in these recipes. Are they labor intensive or shorter? Talk about prep.
Sure. Some more so than others. For instance, gumbo being that you start with a roux, which is a base of flour and traditionally oil. Of course, the cookbook is going to direct you to use a different type of flour and oil than is traditional because we want to make sure that you're getting those good, clean ingredients. But just by virtue of a roux, it's going to take a little bit longer. And your first roux can be intimidating, but don't be intimidated. Just go for it. And you want your roux to be about the color of a dark paper bag. So that's a good tidbit for anybody who's going to give it a go. So some of them can be more labor intensive, or it can just take a little longer because there are a couple extra steps involved, like the roux. Others, however, are really super simple. There's a pastelaya recipe in the book, and traditionally jambalaya is made with rice and either seafood, andouille sausage, chicken, that sort of thing. The pastelaya recipe is based on a dish I used to eat at the fabulous New Orleans festival called Jazz Fest. And it was more of a pasta version of jambalaya, and it was delicious. But I wanted to create something that was just not as high carbohydrate. So that one is made with spaghetti squash as the base. And roasting a spaghetti squash or cooking it in your Instapot if you have one is super simple. So that's, for instance, a very easy entree recipe. And then there are quite a few other quick or easier recipes in the book. So I'd say it can fit the occasion that you're looking for. There's a little bit of both.
Fantastic. Talk about the importance of food prep to you. I'm a big believer that we actually need to make food. We need to create it. And even if you don't like to do that, it should be fresh and you should at least have cut it up yourself. That's very helpful. But talk about the very act of food prep, because for me, like thinking of Southern cooking, and as we're talking about how long does it take you to prepare these, you started out talking about when you walk into the house and there is that smell. I think that's a big part of being home and self-care, but also a piece of getting your hands on your own food may be important. What about you? What are your thoughts on that? And how is that tied to Southern cooking?
Oh, 100%. Okay, well, first off, food prep for me makes the difference in whether I'm going to really have a successful week in eating the way that makes me feel good or not. So food prep is very important, but also just as you're describing, Deborah, getting your hands on the food, having that connection to your food for me is so important. And, there's something called, you probably know about this from your time in Louisiana, there's something called the Holy Trinity. And the Holy Trinity is onions, bell pepper, and celery in the culinary world, right? So when you're chopping that up and just going through that process and getting ready for a gumbo, there is something special about preparing those ingredients. And again, the smells and knowing what's to come, knowing that you're going to put a meal on the table for your family that's not only going to appeal to everybody, but that is just something that's really special. And, I tried to, in the cookbook, provide tips wherever I could. And my mom was so super helpful with some tips as we went through the cookbook. And one thing that she kind of imparted to me was that when you make a roux and you know that you might want to make another gumbo soon, that you make a double roux. Mm-hmm. So you're going to do all of your vegetable prep and chop only once, and you're going to prepare that Holy Trinity, onion, celery, bell peppers. You're going to prepare the roux, and then you're going to freeze half of it. And that way, the next time that you want to make a gumbo, it just happens in a snap, quite frankly, because you've already got that frozen roux that you've defrosted, and the process is super easy and quick from there. So I'd say that it's definitely very important to have that connection with your food, and also easy to, even with some of these more involved dishes, if you will, like gumbo, to take those shortcuts and make it easy on yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And I was thinking the same thing, actually, that like that labor intensive thing, when it is there, I remember it always made such a big pot that it was well worth it because we were eating off of it during that week and we were keeping some or freezing some for later. So it was.
You got it.
Yeah, so good. And I'm a big make ahead girl because I don't know how I'd survive if I didn't. It would be pretty.
Absolutely. And there are notations throughout my cookbook that, say when something freezes well, or I suggest that you make a double recipe of something and freeze it, etc. So I'm right there with you.
That is awesome. Okay, Amanda. So the goddess of Southern clean cuisine, is there a question that I should have asked you that I haven't?
I think we've covered quite a bit. One thing that I guess we could cover is if someone listening is feeling overwhelmed by the prospect of clean eating, whether you're a Southerner or whether you're not, it really doesn't matter. But if you're feeling overwhelmed by it, I'll say one thing that I think really helps is to kind of kick that deprivation mindset aside, because the entire focus of my book, for instance, is eating delicious foods that many who are trying a new lifestyle or a new diet, if you will, never thought they'd see again. That's been the entire focus. So yes, you'll be making changes. Yes, you'll be swapping some ingredients and possibly learning some new ways of doing things, but you will not feel deprived. You'll still get to enjoy foods, only now they'll serve your body much better than they did before. So I just want to reassure anybody listening that I've been there. I've been in the deprivation mindset. Before I started paleo, I thought it would be horrible. And there were times that I really missed these Southern recipes, as I mentioned, but that was the whole impetus for creating this book. So just know that there are people like me out there who've really gone the distance to make sure that you don't feel deprived when you're enjoying clean food. And I know, Deborah, it's the same with you and your delicious recipes.
And yet, yes, mine are probably much more simple than yours.
But simple doesn't mean not delicious. So I think, and the other thing I'd say for anybody who's starting down this journey is, I think a lot of folks think, oh my gosh, I'm never going to eat a bread or a sweet or a treat again. And there's actually something I wanted to mention for your listeners that's a gift on my website, and it's at www.cleansoutherncuisine.com/gift. And that's my one-to-one flour blend. And it's a guide that you'll get. It's a quick start guide with the recipe for that, as well as 3 of our favorite recipes that use it. And the reason I want to mention that is it is a one-to-one flour blend. And if there's some recipe in your life, maybe grandmother's chocolate cake or something that you just really feel like you're going to want to make on occasion, then this really gives you the tools to do that. And the guide goes into taking different things in the recipe into consideration and then how to use the flour to get the best result. So I did want to share that because I know that can really be an intimidating part if you have not eliminated gluten and other inflammatory ingredients yet.
So good. So good. And we're going to make sure we're releasing this in the middle of summer, but this will be so appropriate, I think, as we release in the fall, and we get into the comfort kind of season and we're getting close to the holidays, a great reminder, because I think everybody gets even more so into the need and the want for that comfort kind of food. And that was my next question. Where do listeners get more of you? So listeners, I've got you covered. The links will be in the show notes, but that was cleansoutherncuisine.com. And if you want that little gift, it's /gift is all. I've got links in here, and Amanda is so darn smart and easy to find, and she knows we can't remember a thing. And so she's at Clean Southern or Clean Southern Cuisine is so easy to find. So, listeners, it's your turn. If you have a question you wish I would have asked Amanda and we missed it, you can put that or your comment below the show notes today, and that'll be at flipping50.com/gumbo. What are you waiting for? Let's start flipping 50 today.